Okay, that's lovely. That's great. So just to welcome everybody to today's webinar on SHARE's Summer Research Experience Programme for this summer. This is the webinar about the project specifically. We had the one yesterday afternoon about the programme more generally. So if you've got questions about the application process and so on, please do have a look at that. It will be going up online. Today we'll be focusing on the project, on each of the research projects. And we've got staff here to present on each of those projects. So please focus your questions on those areas. We will be answering questions at the end, and we are going to be recording this meeting as we go through the presentations. We'll stop the recording at the point probably of questions, so that if there's anything particular that you want to ask, please do go ahead with that. We'll answer those at the end, but we'll record the presentations so that anybody who hasn't been able to make it can have a look at those online. So hopefully that's nice and clear for what we're going to do today. My name's Claire Prendergast. I'm the Postgraduate Recruitment Manager for the School of Humanities and Social Sciences here at the University of Cambridge, and I work with our team here in the school to deliver the programme, the SHARE programme, for over the last 5 years or so. So, do you want to move on to the next slide, Shakira? Thanks. So hopefully you've all had a chance to have a look at our web pages and have a look at the information about the projects. The projects which take place as part of SHARE, there's 4 of them. You'll be working in pairs on those projects. And we've got researchers here today to talk about each of those project areas, and you can see those outlined as we go along. And we'll go through each of those. And at the end, we'll take questions for all of them, and hopefully that will keep us going quite smoothly through it, and we can get through in what's quite a tight timeline. So I think we'll move on to the next. Is that that's all the introductory slides? Nope, that's the last introductory slide. So yeah, if you move on to the next one, yeah, then we'll talk about Q&A at the end. That's fine. Yeah, so generally about the projects and the research projects, as we've said, it's an opportunity to participate in actual research that's going on at the moment in these departments, and to work alongside academic researchers, both. So that will be, usually it's a team of people, it might include current PhD students, might include postdoctoral researchers, and as well as academic staff who are professors or lecturers, assistant professors in those departments working across her. So it can be quite a big team of people who are working on these projects. It's a chance to find out a bit more in terms of what postgraduate research is really about. So the aim of SHARE is to give students, current undergraduate students who haven't had the chance really to do much research at the universities that they're at, a chance to take part in postgraduate research with a view, if they're thinking of maybe going to postgraduate study or onto PhD study. So it's a chance to get that experience, to get a taste of what it's like, and to see whether PhD research could really be something that is that is really for you. As I've said, we usually have 2 participants on each project. Sometimes people work together on these things, sometimes you're working on different areas. It's very much dependent upon the project, and what the staff have available for you to be working on. And also it can depend upon the participant themselves. So they will kind of discuss with you, look at maybe what your strengths are. And so therefore they may actually allocate different types of work to participants who are working on the same project, depending upon what your strengths are. Generally speaking, the project, so it's a 4-week programme, and so generally you spend about 4.5 days a week working on the project. Monday mornings are usually given over to training and development needs, and then working the rest of the time is working on the project. So first week there's some induction periods that might take you'll have a little bit less time probably in the departments, and then again in the final week, the final day on the Friday, it's usually given over to presentations, so again a bit less time in that final week as well. You're usually based in the department, although it can vary depending upon the project. You can be doing lots of different things, different activities, and the projects will be able to outline that to you. And equipment will be provided as part of the research placement. So there would be IT equipment, computers, and so on at your place of where the research project is based, if you need that. So if there's anything that you need, that would be, as with any workplace placement, you know, that things will be provided for you when you're working on the project. So hopefully that explains and gives you a brief overview about the programme overall. If you've got any particular questions about the structure, you can pop them in the chat at the end. But I think we'll move on to the first of the projects, then, Shakira. So, and I will hand over to Matthew, who I believe is here to talk about the first project.
Yeah, thanks very much. My name is Matthew Adeleye. I'm an assistant professor of physical geography. I'm based here in the geography department. And what I do is paleoecological reconstruction. I use evidence of plant remains in sedimentary environment to sort of reconstruct vegetation in the past, and including fire history and climate. And the essence of doing this is to better understand how our ecosystems and people, climate, sea level, and factors like that have actually interacted over centuries to millennia. So if we have a good understanding of how ecosystems have actually worked in the past, we will have a better base to actually predict how they might respond to future changes in climate or changes in land use in different parts of the world. So for this project, it's based on Albany, and it will be together with myself and my postdoctoral team, which are Dr. Ellen Hessel and Dr. Josie Andy, who are postdoctoral researcher in my lab at the moment. And Dr. Josie will be leaving for a permanent position in by the end of this month, but another postdoc will be joining starting February, so there will be another person joining the team. So this project will be based, the study site is on Alderney Island, an archaeological site where we've actually sampled summer last year. We took some archaeological excavation and also looked at the surrounding wetlands. So we've got the sediment samples, and it would involve looking at this. Can you move on to the next slide? So the intern would actually be involved in processing the samples in the lab with some chemical processing. And then after that, you look at the micro fossil remains under the microscope. Like I mentioned before, we are using evidence of past life, like plants and some invertebrate remains to reconstruct what was actually there in the past. We want to know how people were interacting with plants, what kind of plants they used in their socioeconomical activities, how they used fire. And because, pollen grains are produced very abundantly by plants every year, so they are well preserved for thousands to millions of years. And in fact, they contain the hardest biological substance. So that's why they are reliable proxy to actually reconstruct past environments. So we look at the pollen and some other invertebrate remains like fungal spores, which are usually associated with the poo of large herbivores like cattle, sheep, and so on and so forth. So that can give us some insight about how people were farming the landscape. And then, of course, we look at the charcoal remains as well, which is evidence of people either using fire for socioeconomic activity or using fire to burn the landscape to promote floral diversity. All of this we don't know at the moment. So the interns will look into these questions and contribute to the broader research picture on the island, because we've also sampled some other sites. So this would be a piece of what we're actually doing to contribute to our knowledge of how people actually use this island during the Bronze Age, the Iron Age period as well, which will sort of inform what the Wildlife Trust people are doing on the island today to preserve the island's flora and see what they can actually bring back to the landscape. So if we find some species, for instance, through this project that are not currently growing on the island today, that will form a baseline for the Wildlife Trust to actually reintroduce those species back to the landscape. I think I've covered pretty much what the project is about. And any questions?
That's great. Thanks very much, Matthew. I think in that case, we'll move on to the next slides, and hopefully that will give time for some of the attendees to think about any questions they have and add them into the chat, and we can pick those up at the end after everyone's finished presenting. I don't see anything at the moment, so we'll move on, and we'll move on to the next slide if that's okay. Thank you very much, Matthew. So I think, is it Beth next?
Yes, I'm here. I'm just waiting for the slides to be updated.
Shakira,
Perfect.
can you?
Thank
That's
you.
it. That's lovely. Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks for the introduction. So firstly, I wanted to give a bit of a background to our share project. So refugee and asylum seekers are people who have left their home countries because of conflict, persecution, or danger. And refugees have been granted protection while asylum seekers are still waiting for their applications to become approved. In the UK, these communities face many challenges with food and nutrition. And this is mainly due to factors around poverty, food insecurity, limited healthcare, and also the stress of resettling. And all these factors make it harder to eat well. There are also policies and structural barriers that also restrict people's access to adequate nutrition. One of these is the increased use of temporary accommodation. So these are mainly hotels in the UK. And these facilities have very limited cooking places, so kitchens. They can have restricted food choices, and they often rely on provided meals, which makes it very difficult to maintain a healthy or a culturally familiar diet. Additionally, families who are seeking asylum can't work, they can't claim benefits, and financial support is really limited. So this is often under £50 per week if meals aren't provided, and under £10 per week if they are. And as a consequence, many families can't afford enough food and often rely on food banks or charities. Now, it's really important to understand what people are actually eating and what impact this has on their nutrition, so we can try and design interventions or policies to help these communities. And some studies have looked at this, but the studies haven't been brought together all in one place. And this is really helpful to us to identify research gaps or opportunities. And this is what our Share Project student will be doing. They'll be conducting a rapid evidence review to try and collate this evidence together. Our project will also examine how researchers have measured dietary intake and outcomes in these communities living in the UK. And this is really important because very few tools are designed for ethnic minority groups in the UK. And many of these tools assume that people are eating culturally familiar foods, which is often not the case for refugee and asylum seekers, particularly those living in temporary accommodation. There's also some other barriers to accessing information about people's nutrition using dietary tools. So for instance, a lot of them are using digital methods, and these can be really hard to use for people who have limited digital literacy, or they may not have access to digital devices like computers or phones, which is sometimes the case for refugee and asylum seekers who come to the UK. So by reviewing the literature, we'll be able to identify what tools have worked before and to identify possible methods for future research. This will feed into a wider programme called DREAM, which stands for Co-Designing Relevant Dietary Assessment Methods. And this project aims to identify suitable ways of measuring diet in refugee and asylum seeking populations using creative and arts-based methods. So just to tell you a little bit more about our team, our project is supervised by myself, Dr. Elizabeth Evely. I'm a registered nutritionist and also a dietary public health researcher at the University of Cambridge. My interests include dietary intake methods, micronutrients, and also sustainability. We have Denise Nglovu, who is a research fellow at UCL, Great Ormond Street Institute of Child Health, and she is a qualitative researcher with background in public health nutrition. She also specialises in local authority stakeholder engagement and policy research with a focus on healthy weight. And then finally, we've got Nancy Kerriman, who is a research associate also at the University of Cambridge, whose research explores policies, framing, and the framing of public health policy with a particular focus on the commercial determinants of health and well-being. So why join us for this project? Well, you'll gain hands-on experience of conducting a rapid literature review, which is often the foundation of research questions and is a really common methodology in research. So if you go on to further study, likely a systematic review or a scoping review will be one of the first techniques that you do whilst in post. You'll also be able to learn a bit more about how nutrition and diet research is conducted and how it's collected in communities. So we hope you can find out a bit more about dietary assessment tools. There also might be an opportunity to contribute to the DREAM study. We've got workshops taking place in May and June with refugee and asylum seeking populations. However, it's uncertain whether the data will be available in time for the SHARE project, but that's something that I can comment on a bit more if someone is interested in this post. We are based at the MRC Epidemiology Unit, and this is in the Adam Brooks Hospital, so just to be aware of that. We are also home to the National Nutrition and Diet Survey, and this is the largest nutritional monitoring survey in the UK. So if you wanted to find out a bit more about how nutrition is monitored in a UK population, we can set up a meeting with the team there as well, so you can learn directly from the experts and meet people who are conducting world-class nutrition research. We're really excited to have someone working with us and really look forward to answering your questions in a bit. So thank you so much.
Thanks very much, Beth. That's great. So we will move on to the next project. I think, Annette, are you here to talk about that?
I'm here, yeah.
It's lovely. Thank you very much. I'll pass over to you then.
Great. So yeah, my name is Annette Green. I'm a postdoctoral researcher in the geography department, currently working for the Centre for Landscape Regeneration. And I do research into diverse stakeholder perspectives in complex restoration settings in the UK. So I'll be the lead supervisor on this project and professional perspectives on interdisciplinary restoration. And the co-supervisors are going to be Chris Sandbrook and Alice Lawrence. So Chris is Professor of Conservation and Society in the Geography Department, as well as Director of the Conservation Research Institute, which is, quote, an inclusive interdisciplinary community of well-leading scholars with an interest in conservation, end quote. So he works with and strategizes across a lot of different disciplines and departments working on conservation and environmental issues from across the natural and social sciences. Alice, who is actually on the call at the moment, Alice Lawrence, she is a PhD student supervised by Chris, and she's a colleague of mine in the geography department as well. And she researches how conservation can better recognise, value and engage with diverse knowledges and forms of evidence. So the three of us have a really diverse range of research interests and backgrounds. My background originally, before moving into social sciences and geography, was in arts and humanities. Chris and Alice originally were natural scientists working in zoology and ecology. But very succinctly, now we're all conservation social scientists, which means that we're interested in the social and political dimensions of conservation and conservation adjacent activities. And we really share an interest in how ways of knowing and understanding nature and the environment inform strategies about nature and the environment, and how they eventually become conservation actions and interventions on the ground in specific places. So this project is about exploring the perspectives of people who are working in some formal capacity, whether as employees or close working partners, in landscape scale restoration projects in Cumbria, up in the northwest. So we recognise that these kind of large scale restoration, ecological restoration projects will invariably involve a lot of different people, professional stakeholders who are working on those projects or partnering with them in really different roles with a really wide range of disciplinary backgrounds and professional experiences, from ecologists, plant sciences, zoology type people, to project managers, administrators, financial teams, community engagement people, farming advisors, some often farmers themselves will have roles in these projects. And these people, with all these different interests and values, have to work together. Ostensibly, they're all pulling in the same direction, but are very likely to have a range of different perspectives and values on what their project's objectives should be and why, to what end. So we are using a particular method to explore that group of people's perspectives, and that is Q method. So Q is a really interesting data collection method. It's designed for mapping out the perspectives of a particular group of people. And in terms of the nuts and bolts of the method, which is kind of set up in that kind of flow chart down the right-hand side, it's a kind of, well, I think of it as a kind of, this particular kind of interview technique or interview-based method in which respondents are asked to rank a set of statements that you give them from most to least, like their point of view. So you end up with both quantitative data from the ranking exercise and qualitative data that comes from the interview, which happens either during or directly after the ranking exercise. So Q is really quite unique as a method in that it's genuinely transdisciplinary. It's really built on principles of both quantitative and qualitative research. I am in the process of doing the research design now, which means that by the time the research placement students arrive in the summer, the data will already be collected on a range of themes relating to restoration decision making, governance, knowledges, norms and values, trade-offs, things like that in the kind of doing of a restoration project. So your task will be related to exploring that data that's already been collected, helping me to come up with preliminary themes or findings, kind of playing around with the data, either on the quantitative, well, really you need to engage with both the qualitative and the quantitative side in Q, but you can have strengths in either area. And the placement will include training from me in much more detail about what Q method is. So please don't worry about if you don't know what Q method is or you've never heard of it before, that training will be part of the placement. We're not expecting any prior knowledge from the placement student. And the last thing to note is that Chris, Alice and I are actually based in the David Attenborough building, which is where the placement students will also be based physically. So the David Attenborough building, or the DAB, is the home of the Cambridge Conservation Initiative, which is a partnership between conservation organisations and the university. So it's quite a vibrant and dynamic space. Usually there's quite a lot going on in the building, a whole range of people from organisations and research projects working across different themes, habitat species, all over the world. So it can be a really, yeah, as I said, vibrant and dynamic place to work. So this project would potentially suit someone who, as I said, is interested in honing their skills in quantitative and or qualitative social science research, and would particularly suit someone who's interested in conservation and environmental issues as well. So yeah, happy to take any questions when we come to the Q&A session. And Alice will be there to help me as well.
That's great. Thank you very much. No, that's lovely. So hopefully people are thinking about some questions about these projects as we're going through. Haven't seen anything posted yet, but I'm sure there'll be some at the end. So we'll just move on to Grace then, to the final project then, and I'll hand over to Grace.
Hi, hi Claire. Hi everyone. I'm Grace Idahosa. I am an assistant professor in the education faculty, particularly looking at education and social justice. A lot of my work is focused on agency, so how different stakeholders within institutions have the agency to navigate constraining conditions, but also how they strategically use enabling conditions towards their benefit. But within that, I explore, for instance, how students, first generation students, navigate the undergraduate degree, or how academics navigate promoting transformation, or how students, leaders within student movements, like engage in protest activities to promote social justice goals and social justice ideals. And this project sits within that, so it represents one strand of exploring how stakeholders navigate institutions. Particularly, we want to understand how senior Black professors, the precious few senior Black professors in UK higher education, navigate the context. These are success stories which we don't often hear about. We see significant underrepresentation. We see institutional cultures that actively resist the inclusion of ethnic minorities, of Black bodies within these institutions. We see violent forms of inclusion, even for those who have been included in this space. But this study is really designed to understand how those who've entered into the space, who've succeeded in the space, how they've navigated that space. The idea being that the stories, the success stories, serves as evidence, or at least what's the word for it now? A successful narrative for students to look up to as they navigate their own journeys and trajectories. But beyond that, so it draws on the counter story tradition. But beyond that, we want to understand this within the context of the backlash against this renewed backlash on DEI. We want to understand how professors navigate this, because this has questions for freedom of speech, how one still foregrounds and push issues of social justice. And a lot of the work that you will be doing, particularly as it relates to the literature review, would be to synthesize literature in relation to Black professors' experiences, and how they navigate this marginalization and this backlash. Then also, the project, beyond the research focus, also has a podcast component where we'll be producing videos or podcasts with these professors, detailing their experiences. I think one of the things we want to highlight here, as I said earlier, is not just the challenges and the difficulties that they have experienced, but also the triumphs, because these are stories that are not often foregrounded, both in the literature, in media and media narratives. So as part of this project, you would be engaged in that process of doing a literature review, but also assisting in preparing the transcripts or the podcasts. And then finally, you'll be engaged in undertaking coding for thematic analysis using NVivo. We are smack in the middle of the projects where we've collected 10 interviews that are currently being turned into podcasts, and we will continue to do more interviews and podcasts as time goes on. So by the time you join us, there will be interviews, there will be transcripts, so data for you to actually work with, such that you are able to work across literature review, what an analysis or particularly thematic analysis looks like, what coding looks like, what NVivo looks like. You're not really expected to be an expert or familiar with it, but it's a help that you have the experience of these different aspects of doing qualitative research, what an interview looks like, what interview questions look like, what does the thematic analysis look like, what does coding look like, and how do we navigate the NVivo environment. That's basically what the project is about. In relation to I did test talking for too long, so my mind is telling me to condense things now. So in relation to who the project team members are, you'll be part of this newly formed Global Justice Collective. So myself, Dr. Onyati, Dr. Molar, Eric, Dami Folayo, and Erin, we're all part of the project, and in many ways part of the Global Justice Collective. Primarily, I'll be the supervisor, but because we're such a close-knit group, you also have access to Dr. Nyati, Dr. Molar, Erin, and now actually Dr. Folayo, because she recently graduated from the faculty. Erin Attridge is finalizing her PhD, and Dr. Molar and Dr. Nyati are both associate and assistant professors, respectively, in the Faculty of Education. I'm not sure if I mentioned that earlier on. Let's see, am I missing any other thing? I guess if you've missed any other thing, you are more than welcome to ask me questions, and I look forward to hearing your questions.
That's great. Thank you very much, Grace. That's lovely. So I think if we want to, Shakira, we could stop recording. So the presentations are there for people to review. If anybody has any questions, they can pop them into the chat now. If there's anything in particular, hopefully that sparked some interest in one of the areas, or so if there's anything in particular that you want to get a bit more information about and ask any of the project teams about their projects, do please put that in